Welcome to this episode of Untold Chapters with Austin Macauley Publishers. Today we have an exclusive interview with Julie D. Jones, author of A Gathering of Angels, her fifth in the Moreland Forensic Crime Fiction series. Stay tuned to discover more. Good morning, Julie. Welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here to discuss your latest novel, Moreland Forensics, A Gathering of Angels. Can you tell us a bit about the genesis of the Moreland Forensics series?
Yep, sure. So the idea for the Moreland Forensic series came about through my love of Devon, in particular Dartmoor. I have always been passionate about writing and wanted to base novels in a location that took the characters from the rugged moors to the coast. And I find it fascinating how criminals are brought to justice, especially through forensic science. So it was only natural that I write crime novels, really. And I was actually lucky to have known Christopher Robin, son of A.A. Milne, who, obviously people probably know created Winnie the Pooh. And when I was a child, Christopher owned a bookshop in Dartmouth, in Devon. And on visits to the shop, Christopher would suggest books that I should read. And he also encouraged me with my writing aspirations. So I feel very honoured and privileged to have known Christopher, who was a wonderful, wonderful guy. And it was really through communication and talking with him that I had a love of books and eventually went on to write.
What can readers expect from Moreland Forensics, A Gathering, in terms of plot, characters and setting?
Well, Gathering of Angels was actually great fun to write. There's actually a stalker who comes into each chapter, and he speaks from his viewpoint. So he tells the readers how his day is going, really, how he's feeling. And you build up quite a connection to him. He actually goes around Plymouth and Exeter murdering women. And for these actions, he tends to blame everybody else except for himself. But there is a bit of a twist with the stalker, but obviously I can't really say what that is. But I had great fun writing it. It was interesting trying to put your thoughts into the headspace of a serial killer. So that was fun.
How does the setting of the English South Devon countryside contribute to the atmosphere and tension of the story?
So readers who have either lived or have visited this part of the UK, which is absolutely stunning, will be able to recognise places where the characters travel to. So in my third book, Conspiracy of Souls, I actually mentioned Buckfast Abbey on Dartmoor, and I mentioned interesting facts about the Abbey. However, I have to say, when a murder takes place, it takes place in the priory down the road, which is actually fictional. But there's a lot of interesting things that I mention about Devon that hopefully people can read and go, oh, yes, I've been there. And I've had some people actually that follow the journey that some people make in the book, some of the characters.
How do you come up with the international themes for the series?
Well, before training as a nurse in Gloucestershire, I actually lived in Bavaria. So in one of my books, Katie, my forensic psychologist, actually travels to Bavaria as part of an investigation. And I have scenes written in German with the English translation to make it a little bit more authentic. And these things I loved writing because I could picture everything in my mind. But I occasionally actually bounce ideas off my husband, for meshing history events with current geopolitical news. So this allows me to add extra diversity and interest to the characters and overall plot. Aftershock, one of my novels, actually focuses on the IRA in South Africa. So I also do a lot of research.
The international theme, I think, really lifts the stories.
Even though I wanted the characters set and based in South Devon, I also wanted them to travel. So each book they definitely travel. And in the one that's currently with Austin Macauley, I actually have written half of it in Australia and half of it in the UK. And that was quite interesting to do because obviously I've got summer in Australia and I've got sailing scenes on Sydney Harbour and then scenes that are happening, say in Exeter, it's in the middle of winter. So it's kind of interesting because you've got to remember when you're writing scenes that you've got one place that's really boiling hot and another place that's quite cold.
Without giving too much away, can you tell us about the main conflict or mystery that drives the plot of Moreland Forensics, A Gathering of Angels?
Yeah, so there's actually quite a few storylines going at the same time, which happens with all of my books. So as I mentioned earlier, I have the stalker who goes around murdering women in Exeter and Plymouth. But at the same time, I have the story of Elliot McCarthy, whose body, a young lad whose body is pulled from the River Dart. And you learn at the beginning of the book that he actually witnessed something, and this could have contributed to his murder. I also have a Pakistani woman and her daughter who have fled Pakistan to England. So I've got that story going at the same time. And then we also see the murder of one of my main characters' partners. And then I've got the conflicts that happen with the actual main characters, the forensic scientists. So for instance, Katie has all the way through from Bound by Polaris, my very first book, you learn that she had feelings for Matt. And when Matt comes back from overseas, things are not quite as Katie expected. So there's lots of things happening.
How did the idea for the team at Moreland Forensics come about?
I really wanted characters that people could relate to. So I decided, look, I'll have siblings and they'll have different scientific backgrounds. For me, it was really important that they had personal struggles as well, work-based problems to solve. And because everybody in life struggles to some extent. And I really wanted characters that readers could relate to. So I guess I just thought, look, I wanted characters that knew each other, I guess, well, but, you know, they don't always like each other. They have to work professionally together. But there's a lot that goes on with Fiona, Katie and James, which are my main characters. And hopefully people will build a good rapport with them throughout my novels.
Do you have a favourite character in A Gathering of Angels?
Yeah, look, I love the stalker. That sounds a bit weird, but he comes across as a lovely chap. He helps little old ladies across the road, describes himself as sensitive, kind, considerate, even loving. He's nice to colleagues, neighbours, family and friends. So, you know, how could you not like him? But I guess one of my favourites has to be Margot Betteridge, one of my top forensic scientists. And Margot has a kind of motherly side to her, but she's also not afraid to make a few threats from time to time. So there's a little bit of a darker side to Margot as the books develop. But overall, I'd probably say as well, Katie is ultimately my favorite. She's a bit of a daredevil. She's not afraid to speak her mind, which I like. I just like the way that her character has developed, and she's had some tough times, but Katie's pretty resilient.
Can you describe your writing process for the series?
Yeah, so I work on what I call chapter mapping. Probably a bit different to other authors, I'm not really sure, but what I do is each chapter for me contains many scenes. So I work out a small sentence for each scene. So sometimes when I'm writing, I will actually move scenes around so that the storyline ultimately makes sense. And people are kept guessing until the end. So I've probably got a different way of writing to some people. I have a computer on my writing desk. I don't actually really like to use pen and paper, and I don't use my laptop very often. So I write when I feel like it. My creative mind then automatically kicks in. I don't really get what people would say. So a lot of people probably get writer's block. I don't really describe it as that, because if I don't feel like writing, I just don't write. But I can lie awake at night trying to work out scenes. And this is really frustrating as I get very little sleep. So at the moment I'm working on something and I'm lying in bed trying to work out a character that I want to bring into the book that I'm currently writing. I can't quite get that at the moment, so hopefully I will.
What advice would you give to aspiring writers who are interested in writing crime fiction?
I would say set your books in a place where you have visited, or a place that really interests you. Let your creative mind take over. So I think you need to be able to picture your scenes as you write them. And it helps if you're writing crime novels to obviously read up on forensics, watch relevant television shows, sit down and plot the basics. So you really want to decide what happens and what happens to who, and then you can work on subplots. But what I would say is that it helps if you don't listen to other people. And when I say that, I just think that other people have got different ideas and different views, and they are likely to take over your book, and it will no longer be your sole creation. So I think have conviction in what you write, and most of all, enjoy writing. For me as well, being a nurse, it helps because I've seen things like gunshot wounds. And I've actually been there where I've had, sadly to say, I've had children that have died in my arms. So from a writing perspective, it's very easy for me to put myself into a scene where someone is dealing with a lot of grief and things like that. So, you know, it does actually help that I've had those life experiences, and I've you know, been there, as I said, when people have been very ill. So it kind of helps when you're writing crime, because there is death obviously throughout crime novels.
I was going to ask about whether you were working on a next sequel for the series,
Yeah.
and I gather you are. So can you give a tease about that at all?
Yeah, sure. So book 6 is currently with Austin Macauley. And that one, as I mentioned, is half in England and half in Australia. It sees, you know, backpackers that are out in Australia getting murdered. And then I am also, I've basically finished book 7, but having said that, I don't know if I'm overly happy with everything with it. So what will happen is I'll do, you know, many reads and then maybe change a few things. And then I'm actually at the moment in the process of writing book 8.
Wow. That's a fabulous series.
Look, I think it's fun. I think when you're a writer, if you don't love what you do, then there's no point doing it. And I just don't find it a chore. I'm just the happiest when I'm actually there working on scenes, and it really comes to life. You know, you picture everything in your mind, what people are wearing, what cars they're driving, and it's fun. It's great fun.
Well, thank you for taking time to appear in this episode of Untold Chapters. It's been really great talking to you and have you share your story with us.
Oh, thank you so much, Nadine. I really appreciate your time as well.
Thank you for listening to the latest edition of Untold Chapters. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify, please follow and review this episode.